Hello there, AP Government. So, we are going to continue talking about political parties. We're actually going to finish up talking about parties today so that tomorrow, if you're watching this on Monday, tomorrow will be Tuesday, we can start talking about nominations, campaigns, and elections. So, the political parties chapter and the elections chapter will go together on a single test towards the end of this week, and that will take us into spring break. So that is where we are headed. On Friday, we left off talking about third parties, and we looked at 4 different types of third parties, got a little bit into each one of these 4. But the first thing that I want to do now is talk about some reasons that third parties tend to struggle. So we have in the United States what's called a two-party system. It's not there by law, and it's not there because the Constitution requires that there be a two-party system, but the way that we structure our elections tends to make it so that we have this two-party system. We're going to look at 2 major reasons first, and then a couple of other reasons. But these 2 structural reasons are what I want to focus on to begin with, because they're probably the most important. They're also the most difficult to understand. So let's first take what's called winner take all or plurality elections, winner take all or plurality. If you ever study comparative governments or the governments of other countries, this term winner take all is sometimes called first past the post. What this means is that in most elections in the United States, take president out of the equation for the moment, but in most elections, whoever gets the most votes wins that election. You don't need a majority of the votes. You don't need half plus one. You only need a plurality. You only need the most votes. So imagine I was to run for governor of Virginia, and imagine there were 4 other candidates. So there's a total of 5 candidates running for governor. If there's 5 candidates splitting up the vote, I might be able to win that election with way less than a majority, maybe 25% or 30% of the vote, and I could win that election. So, this idea of a plurality election, of winner take all, it incentivizes voters not to vote for the candidate that they identify with the most, but to first think of the candidates that they believe actually have a chance. So voters are incentivized to think, okay, maybe I identify most with the libertarian candidate, but I really don't want the Democrat, so I'm going to vote for the Republican. That's a fairly common thing for voters to think in the United States. Or maybe on the other side, they think I really like the Green Party candidate, but I hate the Republican candidate, so I'm going to vote for the Democrat. The first thing voters consider is, okay, which candidates actually have a shot? Maybe there's a candidate I strongly identify with, but they're down in 5 or 10% of the polls, and I want to make sure that this candidate that actually has a shot that I hate, that I vote against them. I want to vote for someone who can beat that person. It's called tactical voting. And winner take all elections, the idea that it's not about getting a majority, it's just about getting the most votes. It tends to, in most elections, whittle things down to the point that there's only 2 really viable candidates going against each other. In the United States, we also have what are called single member districts. In our legislature, consider the House of Representatives. In Virginia, we have 11 congressional districts. You can see them on this map here. Each different color represents a different congressional district. Each district has a single seat. These are single member districts. So the best way to understand single member districts is sort of by understanding its opposite. See, there is a possible system where Virginia would not have these districts at all and would say, we're going to send 11 representatives to the House. So everyone in the state of Virginia on their ballot is going to get a bunch of names, and the top 11 vote getters all get a seat in the House of Representatives. The drawback to that would be multi-member districts. The drawback to that is that we wouldn't get these local representatives like we have in the House. And people kind of like having their local representative, someone from your area who's supposed to represent your interests. But uh, having these single member districts combined with a winner take all system where you don't need a majority, you just need the most votes, these two ways of structuring elections means that our elections tend toward only really having two viable candidates. Third party candidates, independent candidates can run, but they tend to struggle. They tend to be seen by voters as not being viable. Voters think, okay, I don't want to throw my vote away and possibly have someone that I really don't like potentially win this election. So these two structural things lead to third parties having a hard time in the United States. The way campaigns are financed also makes this challenging. Donations tend to go to the two major parties. People who are donating their money want to donate to someone who's actually got a shot. If you donate to a candidate and that candidate loses, you don't get your money back. So you want to donate to someone that actually has a chance of winning. That means third party candidates tend to struggle to raise money. Whereas the Republican Party and the Democratic Party tend to have pretty robust fundraising machines. At the presidential level and the presidential level only, if in a presidential election you are able to meet a certain threshold of support, then you can qualify to have the federal government reimburse you. Basically, they will match whatever money you can raise. So that makes it easier for you to raise money. This was supposed to limit the amount of donations that um, that went to presidential candidates. It was supposed to make them rely on these funds instead of relying on donations. But the actual effect of federal matching funds is that the Republican and Democratic candidates don't need them, and third parties tend to struggle to get enough support to qualify for them because you have to show a certain level of support in order to even qualify for these federal matching funds. So typically, third parties, this is their goal. The Green Party, the Libertarian Party, their goal isn't necessarily to win the presidency, it's to get enough support to qualify for federal matching funds for their next election because that will make it easier for them to fundraise. But they're still having a hard time doing it. That threshold is just a little bit too high. And name recognition becomes a real problem for third-party candidates. These were the two major third-party candidates in 2016. I need to go back and update the pictures, but this is Gary Johnson for the Libertarian Party, and this is Jill Stein for the Green Party. And like I said, these were the two 2016 major third-party candidates. I don't have the 2020 ones up here, but I need to go back and put those in. But pretty much everyone can name the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate, but not everybody can name the even the biggest third party candidates. And there's tons of other smaller third parties. And then, of course, third parties struggle because of the Electoral College. The minor party candidates got thousands of votes in the 2020 election, but they got zero Electoral College votes. In fact, third party candidates have been getting zero Electoral College votes consistently for quite some time. So third party candidates tend to struggle to break through, to break into the Electoral College map and show really any significant support. So all of these are reasons that third parties have a hard time really having an impact on the electoral process. So why do we have them? Why do people choose to vote for third parties if they know they're not going to win? Well, sometimes it's a protest vote. Voters are showing, hey, I'm mad at both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and I want to show it. I still want to vote, so I'm going to vote for a third party because I don't like the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. So, as a form of protest, I'm going to vote for a third party candidate. Or maybe they actually genuinely align with some of these third political parties. They say, look, I'm a libertarian. I actually believe in libertarian ideals. And so I this is closer to my ideal, even if I know that they're not going to win. Or maybe there's one issue that is really, really important to them that a third party is able to capture. The Green Party in 2000 really pushed the Democratic Party more toward embracing climate change as a real thing. And so, because the Green Party was able to siphon off some votes from Democrats, it made them take this issue more seriously in order to get some of those voters back. So third parties do still serve a purpose even if they don't win. So I want to talk about federalism and elections. Remember, we talk often in this class about the federal elections, but we don't talk as much about elections at lower levels of government, state and local elections. But one thing that's important to remember is that elections happen at every level of government. So the map on the left here is the map of state legislatures and what party controls the state legislature. And as you can see, you might have a state like North Carolina, for example, where the Republican won for the presidential race, but it actually has divided government. There's a Democratic governor in North Carolina. Same for Kentucky. Actually, we think of Kentucky as a pretty consistently Republican state, but Kentucky also has a Democratic governor. And man, this also I need to update. I'm falling behind, you guys. This is from Electoral College map is from 2016 as well. But as you can see, again, states that we might think of as consistently Republican or consistently Democratic can actually split when you get down to the state level. The partisan identity of a state is much more firmly established at the national level, but it's actually a little bit more fluid as you get down into state and local governments. So just to sort of solidify this, elections happen at every level of government. Remember, in the state of Virginia, we hold our statewide elections on odd numbered years. That means this year, we're going to be voting for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and all 100 members of Virginia's House of Delegates. So we've got state elections coming this year to determine control of Virginia's state government. And parties that lose the presidency or lose nationally can sort of regroup at the state legislature and governor level. So the two-party system, like I was just saying, is more pronounced at the national level. That loyalty tends to come through, that partisanship tends to come through more at the national level. But as you move down what I sometimes call the vertical line of government, as you move down into the state level and the local level, that partisanship is, like I said before, a little bit more fluid. And there is a national party system for the Democrats, a national party system for the Republicans, uh, and there are state and local party organizations as well. And they're all sort of loosely affiliated with each other. Sometimes the national party system will do something that individual states will kind of ignore. So consider a state that is a little bit more conservative. The National Democratic Party might be quite progressive on an issue, but that state's Democratic Party might kind of be pulling in the opposite direction. So there's lots of independence between the state and local party organizations and that national party organization. The same, of course, is true for Republican parties. Let's take another look at primaries. We've talked about primary season before. We talked about that some in our political participation chapter. Just want to give you some reminders. So I just talked about the National Party Committee. That is the national party organization. It's led by a person called the party chair that is chosen by party members. And we've talked about primaries, we've talked about caucuses already. Remember, open primaries are open to anybody, regardless of party affiliation. If there is an open primary in a state, registered Democrats can vote in it, independents can vote in it, registered Republicans can vote in it, anybody can go vote in an open primary. Feels a little bit more democratic, not in the party sense, but a little bit more lowercase d democratic. A closed primary, only registered party members are allowed to vote in a closed primary. So that's a little less democratic, but the parties kind of like that because there's a little less room for the other party's voters to come in and try to sabotage things. And then caucuses are often long, drawn out party meetings. You're going to be hearing speeches. These are pretty um, insider sorts of things. They tend to be lower participation because there's such a time commitment and such a hassle. So, but all of these open primaries, closed primaries, and caucuses, they all have the same purpose. And we've talked about this before. We've got a bunch of candidates from the same party, all trying to run for the same office, and we need to narrow down who our candidate from our party is going to be. So in the presidential season, we do that by each state having a primary or a caucus. So Virginia has primaries. We talked before about the Iowa caucuses. Those come first. The New Hampshire primaries come next, then Nevada, then South Carolina, and then you get into groups of states that happen together. So all in 2020, all of these states in blue happened on Super Tuesday. They happened early in the process. So in the primary process, states will often try to move their primaries to be earlier. It's called front loading. It's when your state moves their primary or their caucus to earlier in the calendar in order to try to get more attention. States that happen, whose primaries and caucuses happen early in the process, get a lot of attention from the candidates. They get a lot of attention from the media. And so states want to be important in the process. They want to get visits and promises from the candidates. So they move their primaries up. That's called front loading. As the rules stand now, Iowa always comes first, New Hampshire always comes second. We'll see if that continues to be the case. For the Democrats in 2020, Iowa was a disaster. It logistically did not go well, and so there's talk of changing the Iowa caucuses or of not letting them be first. Either way, at these primaries, at these caucuses, the result is that the people who win get delegates. Delegates are party members who go to your party convention in the summer, and the candidate who shows up with a majority of delegates is nominated as that party's candidate. So in 2020, Joe Biden won a majority of the Democratic Party's delegates, so that's how he became the nominee. Republicans use a winner-take-all system for awarding their delegates, shortens the process a little bit. You don't have to get a majority in a state. You just have to get the most votes in a state, and then you get all of that state's delegates. Democrats use a proportional system where if a candidate gets at least 15%, they're guaranteed some delegates from that state. So that kind of slows the process down for Democrats because you can have people who say, well, I'm not going to drop out yet because I'm still winning delegates, so I'm going to keep limping on toward the convention. And then once a candidate becomes their party's nominee, they tend to move their views to become a little bit more centrist. Tend to, not always, but this is sometimes called pivoting. So Democratic candidates, in order to win their primaries and win their caucuses, they often will try to be very liberal and sound very liberal to appeal to their party's base. Republicans will try to sound very conservative in order to appeal to their party's base. But if you want to win the election, you got to win the folks in the middle. So once you've become the candidate and you've consolidated support, now you've got to figure out how to sound a little bit more moderate so that you can win the independents in the middle. The summer before a presidential election, each party holds a party convention where the delegates vote. Whoever has a majority of the delegates becomes that party's candidate. Democrats have what are called super delegates. Each state for Democrats has some normal delegates and some super delegates. Super delegates are party bigwigs, former elected officials, people who have spent a long time in Democratic Party politics who do not have to follow, they are not bound by the results of the primaries and the caucuses. Normal delegates are bound to vote for the people who won their primary or their caucus. They don't have a choice. They can't vote based on their conscience. Super delegates come from a state but are not bound to vote for whoever won that state. It's a way for the party to have a little bit more control, a way for the party establishment to help decide. Okay, so that's the parties during the primaries. Quickly, this is two political cartoons by a guy named Thomas Nast. Basically, this is the political cartoonist who first labeled Republicans as an elephant and first labeled Democrats as a donkey. So he labeled Republicans as an elephant and Democrats as a donkey in his political cartoons, and the labels just stuck. So that's why today, Republicans, the GOP, the grand old party, as it is nicknamed, have the elephant as their symbol. Democrats have the donkey. It's because of these political cartoons. And the last thing, some elections are nonpartisan. So often when you're voting, national and state elections, a candidate will have a letter next to their name, a capital letter D or a capital letter R, to let you know this person is a Democrat or this person is a Republican. But when you get down into local elections like city council, often those elections are nonpartisan. So they don't involve having those labels. We talked about patronage before, the spoil system. Just go back to, we talked about this some in bureaucracy, the idea of getting federal government jobs as a result of political loyalty, the spoil system being replaced by the professionalization of the bureaucracy, right, being replaced by the merit system. We looked at these different types of elections. We talked about this in the last chapter as well, referendums, initiatives, and recalls. With a referendum, the government is putting an issue on the ballot. With an initiative, the citizens, by petition, are putting an issue on the ballot. And with recalls, you're trying to remove an elected official by popular election. And these don't happen at the national level. They can only happen at state and local levels if your state and local government allow for them. We used to think of elections as being party centered. People would have loyalty to their party and would vote for a candidate because that candidate represented the party they were loyal to, meaning elections used to be much more party centered. That is changing to where elections are now much more candidate centered. Now people are following the candidates that inspire them, regardless of which party they are in. So Donald Trump, for example, not a very traditional Republican like the kind we would expect coming from the party of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush. He had some ideas, some ideologies that did not fit in with that Republican way of doing things, but he didn't need the party's approval. In fact, he did not have the Republican Party's approval in 2015 and 2016 when he was first running, but he was still able to attract enough of a following because of our more candidate-centered elections. Candidates can use media themselves. They can use social media to reach their voters. Candidates used to rely on parties to reach out to their voters and educate them, but now candidates can do it themselves. They don't need parties the way they used to. So elections are shifting from a more party-centered focus to a more candidate-centered focus. Okay, that's everything for political parties. We will pick up next time when we talk about nominations, campaigns, and elections. I will see you then.